The heat in Red Creek could kill a man. For Eleanor Miller's husband, Thomas, it did. Or so they told her. That afternoon, the sun beat down on the dusty street like a hammer on an anvil. Eleanor pushed open the door to the general store, the little bell above it barely making a sound. Her baby, Samuel, was a hot, fussy weight against her chest. All she wanted was milk. A simple thing. But in a town like Red Creek, nothing was ever simple. She stepped inside, and that's when she walked straight into the spider's web. He was standing by the sacks of flour, watching her. Caleb Stanton, the man who owned half the valley and had a mortgage on the other half. The man who had employed her husband. He was big, carved from the same rock and unforgiving sun as the landscape around them. And his eyes saw everything. Eleanor approached the counter, the worn floorboards groaning under her feet. Her purse felt light, empty. "A pint of milk, Mr. Henderson," she asked, her voice a dry whisper. The store owner, a sweaty man with a tired face, just shook his head. "Sorry, Mrs. Miller. Heat's soured the last of it. Nothing fresh." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the heat. Samuel started to whimper, a hungry, desperate sound that tore at her heart. Her eyes scanned the shelves, landing on a dusty tin of condensed milk. Expensive, not right for a baby, but it was all there was. Just as she reached for it, a shadow fell over her. Caleb Stanton was there. He hadn't made a sound. "Trouble, Mrs. Miller." His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. She flinched, clutching Samuel tighter. "Mr. Stanton." He ignored her, his gaze fixed on the empty milk shelf, then on her son. He seemed to take in the whole miserable picture in a single, silent moment. "Thomas was a good man," Caleb said, his voice dangerously soft. "Dependable. It's a shame what happened to him." He paused, and the silence in the store was heavy enough to choke on. "Henderson," Caleb said, his voice suddenly sharp as steel. "Give Mrs. Miller what she needs. Flour, bacon, canned goods. Put it all on my account." It wasn't an offer of charity. It was a command, an assertion of power. Eleanor felt a wave of relief so strong, her knees went weak, but it was followed by a chill. This wasn't kindness. This was a transaction. But what was she buying? Or what was being bought? She gathered the supplies, her hands trembling. She didn't look at him, but she could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. As she stepped back out into the blinding sun, the small sack of groceries feeling like a lead weight, she knew one thing for sure. Her husband's death was no accident, and she had just made a deal with the devil to find out why. The groceries from Caleb Stanton were a lifeline, but they were also a leash. Days turned into a week. Every evening, just as the sun began to bleed across the horizon, he would appear. He wouldn't knock. He'd just be there, on her porch, a silent, imposing figure. He never said much at first. He'd ask about Samuel. He'd talk about the weather. Small talk from a man who didn't seem built for it. Eleanor was terrified, but she was also smart. She knew this was a game, a test. She played the part of the grieving widow. Helpless, lost. But every night after he left, she would write down every word he said, every question he asked. She was looking for a pattern. And then she found one. He always talked about cattle, his cattle. How some had gone missing, disappeared into thin air. He'd mention other ranchers who'd had the same problem. Small-time outfits that had been forced to sell out, their land gobbled up for pennies on the dollar. He never mentioned the sheriff. Not once. But Eleanor knew. She remembered Thomas in the weeks before he died, coming home late, his face tight with worry. He'd been muttering about Sheriff Briggs, about ledgers that didn't add up. Caleb was drawing her a map, but he was leaving out the most important landmark. He wanted to see if she could find it on her own. One night he changed his approach. He was leaning against the porch rail, staring out at the darkening landscape. Thomas saw things, Caleb said, his voice low. He was too honest for his own good. Some men in this town, they don't like honest men. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. What did he see, Mr. Stanton? She asked, her voice steady. Caleb turned to look at her, his eyes unreadable in the twilight. He saw a snake in the garden, a big one, coiled right around the lawman's badge. He was talking about Sheriff Briggs. He was confirming her darkest fear. His death, Caleb continued, taking a step closer. The fall from his horse. It was too neat, too convenient. A cold fury began to burn in Eleanor's gut, pushing aside the fear. You think Briggs killed him? Caleb didn't answer right away. He just watched her, his expression intense. I think Briggs is getting rich off stolen cattle, and I think Thomas found out. What do you think, Mrs. Miller? It was another test. He wasn't just giving her information. He was forcing her to connect the dots, to say it out loud, to become a part of it. I think my husband was murdered, she said, the words tasting like poison. And I want to know who gave the order. A slow, cold smile spread across Caleb's face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just confirmed its ally was just as hungry. Good, he said, because knowing is one thing, proving it is another. And that's where you come in. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a list of names. These are Briggs's deputies, he said. One of them is weak. Find him. Eleanor stared at the list, then back at Caleb. He was asking her to walk into the lion's den, to get close to the men who may have killed her husband. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a spy, and her life depended on how well she could play the part. Eleanor's world shrank to the dusty streets of Red Creek. Every trip to the store, every walk with Samuel in her arms, was a mission. She was no longer invisible in her grief. She was a ghost, listening, watching. The name she focused on was Deputy Miller, a young man, barely older than she was, with nervous eyes and a constant need to prove himself. Caleb had told her he had a gambling problem, a weakness. Eleanor started small. A shared glance at the general store, a polite nod on the street. She let him see her vulnerability, her loneliness. She made herself into a mirror of his own quiet desperation. One afternoon, she saw him leaving the saloon, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He'd lost again. She accidentally dropped her basket of laundry as he passed. He rushed to help, his hands fumbling with the scattered clothes. "Thank you, Deputy," she said, her voice soft and grateful. She looked him in the eye, holding his gaze just a second too long. "It's hard. Managing on my own." She had planted the seed. Over the next few weeks, she watered it. She'd ask for his help carrying a sack of flour. She'd stop him to ask about a town ordinance. Small, harmless interactions that slowly chipped away at his defenses. He started seeking her out, eager for the quiet sympathy she offered. He started talking. He complained about the sheriff, about the long hours, the low pay, about the special jobs he was forced to do. "What kind of special jobs?" Eleanor asked one evening, her heart pounding. They were standing in the shadows near the livery stable. The deputy looked around nervously. "Just night patrols, out on the range. Briggs says we're looking for rustlers, but we never seem to catch any. We just move cattle around." He was practically confessing. He was telling her they were the rustlers. But then his eyes narrowed. "Why you asking so many questions, Eleanor?" Ice shot through her veins. She had pushed too hard. She immediately let tears well in her eyes, a trick she was getting frighteningly good at. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's just Thomas." He worked on the range. I keep thinking, what if he saw something? What if that's why he fell? The deputy's suspicion melted into pity. Hey, now, don't you worry about that. It was an accident. Briggs said so himself. He was lying, and they both knew it. She had what she needed. She went straight to Caleb's ranch, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She told him what the deputy had said. Caleb listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. When she was finished, he nodded slowly. Good, was all he said. Good? Eleanor's voice rose, laced with a tremor of fear and anger. He almost figured me out. You put me in incredible danger. I put you in a position to get the truth, Caleb corrected her, his voice cold. And you did. You've confirmed the how. Now we need the why. Briggs isn't just stealing cattle. He's clearing the land. But for who? He walked over to a large map of the valley spread across his desk. He tapped a long, straight line that cut through several of the smaller ranches. The railroad, he said. They're coming through, and someone is buying up the land cheap before the price skyrockets. Someone who knows exactly where the track is going to be laid. He looked at her, his eyes glinting. Briggs is just the hired help. There's someone else pulling the strings. Someone with real money. Real power. Eleanor stared at the map, at the pieces of land that had been stolen, at the path of the coming railroad. The scope of the conspiracy was bigger, darker than she had ever imagined. But then Caleb did something that chilled her to the bone. He reached into a locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. I didn't want to show you this, he said, his voice softer now. Not until I was sure you could handle it. He slid it across the table. It was Thomas's handwriting. Your husband wasn't just a victim, Eleanor, Caleb said, his voice heavy with the truth he knew would break her. He was a part of it. He was helping Briggs, keeping their books. This journal is the proof. Eleanor opened the journal, her hands shaking. Inside, in her husband's familiar script, were pages of numbers, dates, names, a detailed record of the entire criminal enterprise, the man she had been mourning, the honest man she was trying to avenge. Was a lie. Caleb hadn't just armed her with a weapon against the sheriff. He had just destroyed the last good thing she had to hold on to. And as she looked up at him, she saw the cold, hard truth in his eyes. He had known this all along. The world tilted on its axis. Eleanor stared at the journal, at the damning proof in her own husband's hand. He wasn't an innocent man who stumbled upon a crime. He was a bookkeeper for thieves, a conspirator. Her grief, the pure, clean pain she had carried for months, curdled into something ugly and complex. Rage, betrayal, shame. Why? She whispered, the word barely making it out of her throat. Why would he do this? For you, Caleb said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. For Samuel. He was in debt, Eleanor. Deep. Briggs offered him a way out, a chance to give his family a better life. He took it. He let that sink in. He was painting a picture of a desperate man, not an evil one. But he had a conscience, Caleb continued, his voice a low murmur. It started eating at him. The other ranchers being forced out, losing everything. He was going to expose the whole thing. He told me so himself, the day before he died. This was a new twist, a new layer to the lie. Thomas wasn't a hero, but maybe he was trying to be. He came to you, Eleanor asked, looking up from the journal. He did, Caleb confirmed. He brought me this journal. He wanted my help to take Briggs down, but Briggs must have found out. He silenced Thomas before we could make a move. The story was perfect. It explained everything. It salvaged a piece of her husband's honor, recasting him as a man on the path to redemption. But as Eleanor looked at Caleb, a cold sliver of doubt entered her mind. It was too perfect. Caleb had this journal the entire time. He had let her believe her husband was a saint. He had used her grief, manipulated her, all to serve his own ends. What were his ends? Justice for Thomas? Or was it something more? "So what now?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside her. "Now we end it," Caleb said, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "This journal is the key. But it's Thomas's word against the sheriff's. We need more. We need the original land deeds, the ones Briggs forged to take control of the ranches." He pointed to the map again. "They're in his office, in a safe behind a portrait of the governor." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to break into the sheriff's office?" "Not break in," Caleb said calmly. "You're going to be invited in. There's a town dance tomorrow night. Everyone will be there, including the sheriff and his deputies. His office will be empty, but the building will be open." The plan was insane. It was reckless, but it was also the only way. The storm that had been brewing inside Eleanor finally broke. She slammed the journal shut. The fear, the grief, the betrayal, it all coalesced into a single point of white-hot fury. "All right," she said, her voice shaking with the force of her decision. "I'll do it." Caleb nodded, a flicker of something, admiration, respect, in his eyes. He moved closer, the air between them crackling with a tension that had nothing to do with the conspiracy and everything to do with the storm they had weathered together. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Eleanor," he began, his voice rough. She didn't let him finish. She surged forward and kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion or love. It was a kiss of anger, of desperation. It was a seal on a dark pact. It was the closing of a door on her old life and the kicking open of a new one. He was startled for a moment, then his arms wrapped around her, pulling her tight against him, returning the kiss with a fierce intensity that matched her own. It was a collision, a confirmation of their broken, dangerous alliance. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the entire world had changed. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady now, hard as diamonds. "Briggs falls, and then you and I are going to have a talk about what you really want." The night of the town dance, the air was thick with music and forced laughter. Red Creek was pretending to be a normal town, full of normal people. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a phantom, her face a pale mask of calm. Inside, her nerves were screaming. She saw Sheriff Briggs by the punch bowl, laughing too loudly, his face flushed with whiskey. She saw Deputy Miller, his eyes darting around nervously. Caleb was there too, a silent pillar of power, watching her from across the room. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. She slipped out of the dance hall and crept along the side of the building to the sheriff's office. Just as Caleb had said, the door was unlocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped inside. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and gun oil. The portrait of the governor stared down at her, his painted eyes seeming to follow her every move. With trembling fingers, she lifted the heavy frame off the wall. Behind it was a small iron safe. Caleb had given her the combination. He'd gotten it from a disgruntled clerk Briggs had fired. He had thought of everything. Her fingers were slick with sweat as she turned the dial. Left, right, left. A soft click echoed in the silent room. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. Inside were stacks of papers, deeds, ledgers. She frantically searched for the ones Caleb had described, the ones for the ranches along the railroad line. She found them. Tucked at the bottom, a neat little stack of lies and stolen futures. But as her fingers brushed against them, they hit something else, something hard and metallic. She pulled it out. It was a small silver locket, engraved with the letter E. Her blood ran cold. It was hers. A gift from Thomas on their first anniversary. She thought she had lost it months ago. Why was it here? In the sheriff's safe? Then she saw the small piece of folded paper tucked inside. She opened it. The note was from Briggs. "Caleb is getting suspicious. Thomas has to have an accident. Make it look good. Use this to plant on the body if you have to. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Eleanor felt the floor drop out from under her. The world dissolved into a dizzying blur of lies. Caleb hadn't been helping her find justice for Thomas. He had been using her to eliminate a business rival. Briggs didn't kill Thomas because Thomas was going to expose him. Briggs killed Thomas on Caleb's orders. Caleb wanted the land for himself. All of it. He and Briggs were partners until Briggs got too greedy or became a liability. Thomas was just a pawn they sacrificed. And she was the second pawn, moved into place to take down the first. Her husband hadn't been on the path to redemption. He'd been trying to play two powerful men against each other and lost. The man she had kissed last night, the man she had allied herself with, was the true snake in the garden. He was the one who signed her husband's death warrant. Clutching the deeds and the locket, Eleanor stumbled out of the office, her mind a whirlwind of horror and fury. She had the proof to destroy Sheriff Briggs, but she now had the knowledge to destroy Caleb Stanton, too. The game had changed, and she was no longer playing for justice for Thomas. She was playing for revenge. Eleanor walked back into the dance hall, a woman transformed. The grieving widow was gone. In her place was an angel of vengeance. She ignored Caleb's questioning gaze and walked directly to the center of the room, where the music had just stopped. "Sheriff Briggs," she said, her voice ringing out in the sudden silence, clear and cold as a funeral bell. Every head turned. The sheriff, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looked at her with drunken annoyance. "What is it, Mrs. Miller?" "I believe you have something that belongs to me," Eleanor said, holding up the stack of forged deeds. "These parcels of land, stolen from my neighbors, stolen from my husband." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Briggs's face turned from red to white. "That's a crazy accusation." "Is it?" Eleanor said, her voice dripping with ice. "Because I have the proof. Right here. Forged signatures, illegal transfers, all in your safe." Briggs started to bluster, calling for his deputies, but the townspeople were already closing in, their faces hard with anger. They had all suspected. Now they knew. Eleanor let them surround the sheriff. She had thrown the first stone. The avalanche had begun. Then she turned and walked straight toward Caleb Stanton. He was watching her, his face a mask of cold fury. He knew she had double-crossed him. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the muscle twitching in his jaw. "You," she whispered, her voice so low only he could hear. "You're next." She opened her hand. Lying on her palm was the silver locket. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He recognized it. "The sheriff will talk," she said, her voice a venomous hiss. "He'll tell them everything to save his own skin. He'll tell them who gave the order." Caleb's expression was terrifying. For a second she thought he might strike her down right there. But he was too smart for that. He was a chess player, and she had just flipped the board over. "What do you want, Eleanor?" he growled. "What you wanted," she replied. "Everything." Federal marshals, summoned by a telegraph Caleb himself had helped her send, burst through the doors. The dance hall erupted into chaos. Briggs was taken into custody, shouting threats and accusations. In the confusion, Caleb grabbed Eleanor's arm, his grip like iron. He pulled her out a side door into the cool night air. "You think you've won," he snarled, backing her against the wall. "You have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," she shot back, unafraid. "I've cleaned up this town. Your way. Now it's my turn." He stared at her, a strange, dangerous light in his eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was something else, something that looked terrifyingly like respect. A slow smile spread across his face. This town isn't a prize to be won, Eleanor. It's a beast to be tamed. You've cut off the head of one snake, but the nest is still here. You can't control it alone. I won't have to, she said. The marshals brought a cuffed Sheriff Briggs past them. As he saw Caleb, his eyes went wide with betrayal and fear. Stanton, you set me up. I'll tell them everything. I'll tell them about Thomas Miller. Caleb didn't even flinch. He just watched the sheriff get dragged away. He turned back to Eleanor. He's right. He'll talk. And my name will be tied to his. Unless someone with a very compelling story provides a different narrative. Someone like a grieving widow who uncovered the whole conspiracy herself. The final piece clicked into place. He wasn't going to silence her. He was going to use her. You'll be a hero, Eleanor, he said, his voice a seductive whisper. The woman who brought down a corrupt tyrant. The lands will be returned. You'll be the most powerful woman in this valley. And you? She asked. I'll be your silent partner, he said. Every hero needs a wealthy benefactor. We'll run this town together, the way it should be. He was offering her a throne, built on the bones of her husband and the lies they would tell together. For the first time since Thomas died, Eleanor saw a future. It wasn't a future of peace or happiness. It was a future of power, a future she had earned with blood and secrets and fire. She looked at the man who had ordered her husband's death, the man who had manipulated her, and the man who was now offering her the world, and she made her choice. Get your hands off me, she said, her voice flat. He released her arm. She straightened her dress and looked him dead in the eye. We have work to do. The story of Eleanor Miller, the avenging widow, became a legend in Red Creek. But only two people knew the real story. They ruled the town from the shadows, a queen and her king, bound not by love but by the dark secrets they shared. What do you think? Was Eleanor's final choice an act of justice or the ultimate corruption? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where the line between hero and villain gets blurred into oblivion, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell for more.